Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel at War update. And as we're set to deliberate the latest, particularly regarding Yemen, the Gaza Strip, Iran, and Syria, if there is enough time for it today, it's always important to remember that today we mark day 579 since the Islamist Hamas and its terror affiliates launched their atrocious onslaught on southern Israel on October 7th of 2023. Since then, 59 hostages remain in Hamas captivity from the 251 that were kidnapped on October 7th. And on that, we'll start with our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, can you update us? What is the state right now? President Donald Trump affirmed the count of those still amongst the living is unfortunately and regrettably only 21, with the remainder being already murdered in Hamas captivity.
That's true, Jonathan. This has been the accepted number in the Israeli military and intelligence circles for a while, even though the official number remained at 24, but there was some heavy concern that the real number is indeed 21. And here we are on May 7th, which according to some counts was VE Day, Victory in Europe Day in 1945. But here we are 19 months to the day after October the 7th. And whatever number of hostages alive or dead are still there, Israel has not been able to get them released. Now, as you said, the mixture of issues is such that President Trump, his special envoy, Stephen Witkoff, the Department of State's spokesperson, Tammy Bruce, and others are all sounding the same message, that here we are a week or so ahead of President Trump's visit to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE, and some big announcements are afoot. What they are, we can only guess. We can hope that at least one of them has to do with the hostages, not only with American-Saudi business deals and the like. Now, Yemen.
Before we go to Yemen, I'd like to give our other panelists also an opportunity to give their 2 cents about the Gaza Strip, and then we'll immediately dive into the Yemeni topic. Also joining us for the discussion include retired Brigadier General Mark Kimmett, formerly in U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Political and Military Affairs, and Brigadier General in Reserve Dr. Amnon Sofrin, formerly the Chief of Intelligence at Mossad, as well as a senior officer at the IIAF Intelligence Directorate. And I'd like to start with you, General Kimmett. When we're talking about the Gaza Strip, it seems that Israel is calling the mobilization of tens of thousands of troops, somewhat in the ballpark of 60,000 troops, to launch a very significant campaign. But nonetheless, there's still a window of opportunity for Hamas to capitulate its various demands by reaching a diplomatic resolution, at least partial or a full diplomatic resolution. What can you tell us about that, and how is this viewed from Washington at this point in time?
Well, I think the view from Washington is let the Israeli military do what it needs to do. There does not seem to be significant reaction either officially or publicly on the upcoming campaign. I think the United States has become almost inured to the Gaza situation and is focused elsewhere. And if 1 out of 50 Americans think about Gaza today, that's probably more than I would suspect.
General Sofrin, your take on that, particularly at the time when we hear also Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz coming out and saying if we launch this campaign, the high-intensity campaign, be it gradually implemented, there's no stopping to it, since this is going to continue, persist, until all of the objectives are achieved?
First of all, the Israeli establishment, the government, and of course, the leadership of the IDF wants to prove that things could have been done differently than before. That means to launch what we call a very massive attack, and this time not to get in, to destroy and get out, but to stay there and keep on holding territories that belong to Hamas, as if the Hamas leadership is considering that this is their territory, and capturing territory and pushing the civilian residents of Gaza into a small piece of territory on the what we call southwest part of Gaza Strip will probably apply pressure on Hamas, and Hamas will begin to understand that it's not what used to be before. The rules of games are being changed, and that's the message that the Israeli government wants to convey to Hamas. Now, having said all that, Hamas, for the time being, is not getting softer in his position. He's still sticking to his own ideology that is keep telling that for 19 months that the end of the war, getting out of Gaza Strip and leaving Hamas there, not necessarily ruling or controlling Gaza Strip, but nevertheless existing in Gaza Strip as another entity. These are what we call the terms that Hamas set for getting all the prisoners or all the people that are being held in Hamas captivity back to Israel.
Indeed. The 59 hostages, again, out of them, 21 are among the living. The remainder, unfortunately, are no longer among the living in light of Hamas's atrocities. We're talking here about young people, the majority of them, and therefore the circumstances, one can only imagine what led to their murder. But nonetheless, Mr. Oren, we do hear reports coming out of Rafah in which Hamas terror operatives are capitulating to the IDF's pressure there. It seems like the case study that the military has done in this southern part of the Gaza Strip has yielded results. And I say this very carefully since the maze of the fog of war, so to speak, with limited information coming out of there, is being strictly adhered to.
Well, we do hear of particular cases of 2 or 3 Hamas operatives, at least one of whom took part in the massacre on October the 7th and was promoted over time to lieutenant, to platoon leader, have given up. They surrendered. They gave Israel some important bits of information. But this is not massive. We have not seen dozens or hundreds of armed Hamas personnel surrendering en masse and calling on their friends to come out and give themselves up. We have seen such views a year ago or so when the Israeli operation started, but not recently. Perhaps they are concerned that their families will meet great harm if they do it. Whatever the case, we do not see any visible signs of collapse. Sometimes, as we saw in Afghanistan or in Syria, such a collapse can be very rapid, but we have not seen it start. Now, all in all, of course, notionally, there can be one of 3 outcomes: a big deal, a medium deal, or no deal regarding the hostages. And right now, it seems as if the medium deal, the so-called Witkoff outline, is the more probable one. About 10 out of the 21 hostages to be released in exchange for some withdrawal and the release of hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. But what about the fate of the other 11 or so hostages who will be doomed to wait at least 5 or 6 weeks for the next phase.
Indeed. Well, there is an Egyptian proposal on the table right now being deliberated. Of course, this is not necessarily going back and forth between Hamas and the Egyptians, but rather between Israel and the Egyptians at this stage. So we're waiting to see Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu during a meeting with the president of Cyprus, Nikos, who basically came and stated that Qatar was the one hampering on the latest since it's not pressuring Hamas enough in order to succumb to the various demands that Israel has set. But General Kimmett, let's shift gears to Yemen. U.S. President Donald Trump, following the Israeli strikes on both the Sana'a International Airport as well as other significant installations in Yemen under Houthi control, specifically also the 1st Armored Division's headquarters and a rearmament post and other different installations, came out and stated that under Omani negotiations, an arrangement has been reached, not a deal in his words, but rather an understanding that they would both cease fire against maritime shipping, which was the core focus of the American campaign against this Iranian proxy.
Yeah, I was glad to see that announcement, but I still remain somewhat suspect whether that word has gotten down to all the Houthi troops. I'm going to give it a week before I actually determine one way or the other in my own mind whether there really is a ceasefire. Again, we know what ceasefires mean in the Middle East, and let's just see how porous this one is.
Well, you're not wrong. After the announcement of Trump, there were 2 attacks, two launches towards the Harry S. Truman. The Houthis then came out and stated that Israel is not part of it, so they're going to continue firing against Israeli ships, as was the case during the course of all of those months that we're talking about. So it is a big question mark on whether or not this is actually coming into effect. But nonetheless, President Trump has instructed Central Command to cease fire. How, as a former CENTCOM officer, how would you contend with such a reality in which you're supposed to hold back while the Houthis do not necessarily abide by their own commitments?
Well, obviously, that order that was given by President Trump does not include the ability to operate in self-defense. So it's not as if people on those aircraft carriers, on those land-based airfields are just simply sitting on their hands. Those instructions can be turned around quite quickly as well. I think we understand the generally volatile temper that Pete Hegseth has, and I would suspect that any violation, significant violation of that ceasefire by the Houthis, that ceasefire on our side would not stand.
General Sofrin, as I mentioned, the Houthis do not regard Israel as party to this understanding. Just this morning, there was an unmanned aerial vehicle en route to Israel. It was intercepted by 2 IIAF helicopters, which obviously indicates that the Houthis are resolved to continue launching sporadic fire at Israel. What are we to expect in this context? Israel was taken by surprise by President Trump's announcement.
First of all, Israel was taken by surprise because I don't believe that it was coordinated with the Israeli government. And after all, the agreement is between the American administration and the Houthis. It says that if we, at least that's what the Houthis are claiming, that if you stop attacking us, we will stop attacking your vessels. Not all the vessels sailing at the Red Sea, but your vessels, meaning the American vessels. Now, on that same announcement, they said that as long as the fighting in Gaza goes on, we are entitled and obliged to engage Israel. It's not only that the UAV this morning, just a few minutes ago, there was an announcement about a ballistic missile that was intercepted outside our country's boundaries, coming out, of course, from Yemen. And that means that, first of all, they see themselves free to keep on engaging Israel. And on the other hand, denying Israeli vessels or vessels aiming to go to Eilat Port to sail at the Red Sea.
Well, General Kimmett's skepticism, I think, is well illustrating the sentiments here in Israel and other countries in the region. But nonetheless, when we're talking about the patron of the Houthis, namely the Islamic Republic of Iran, it is obviously very happy to see that this announcement was made and made an announcement of its own in which it's basically said here, Israel is capitulating and so is the United States. Just a couple of days before, we are expected to see a potential fourth round of talks between the Islamic Republic and the United States on the former's nuclear program. President Trump, Mr. Olin, defines this moment in time as crunch time when we're talking about the Iranian diplomatic discourse with the Iranians. What can you tell us about that?
So, of course, the Omani connection is front and center. The same Omani mediation effort between the United States and Iran has now succeeded, at least according to the American side, in mediating between the United States and the Houthis. Now, of course, we all remember that throughout the last couple of months, both President Trump as well as Secretary of Defense Hegseth have threatened Iran that if the Houthis persist in their attacks, Iran itself would be subject to an American retaliation. This has not come to pass. And instead, the Omanis have probably tied together the Iranian and Houthi files in the talks with the Americans. Now, perhaps President Trump's appetite has now been whetted by the so-called Houthi success, if it is one. Now, what happened last night, Washington time, or even Israel time, but early afternoon Washington time, was that President Trump made this surprise announcement. Then Envoy Witkoff repeated what the Omanis said regarding the Houthi position. There was never any Houthi announcement, the way it is done in diplomacy. So to go back to your question, is it really a crunch time? There is no deadline. There is no ultimatum. President Trump has talked about June, next month, as a very crucial time, but this has now seemed not really rock solid.
I will take a different position. Even though it does appear this way, I do agree that the sentiments of the discourse do not really seem to project encouragement to those wary of an Iranian nuclear weapon. But nonetheless, I think President Trump, and this is something that Senator Tom Cotton goes back to time and again, he understands Iran's the threat from the Islamic Republic of Iran. He understands the threat from a nuclear-armed Iran, something that he's been dealing with for at least a decade. And therefore, when we're talking about this, I doubt, particularly about a legacy perspective, I doubt he would go for a certain deal that would taint his legacy as another 2.0 JCPOA, so to speak. General Kimmett, your take on that?
He does have a dilemma. It is clear that he wants to make a deal. The Iranians are clear that they know he wants to make a deal. And when you want to make a deal, that bad, as we saw with President Obama in the first instance. When the objective becomes a deal, the terms of that deal are not nearly as good as if you go in with negotiations and are prepared to walk away. So I'm afraid that in his rush to get a deal, he's not going to get the deal that will embellish his legacy, even though he'll tell the world it does.
So, do you see him really going that way, however, considering the fact that I do agree he wants a deal and he does show his cards, so to speak, when we're talking about his intentions. The Iranians are trying to exploit it and are pushing a very vigorous campaign of both threatening, on the one hand, U.S. assets in the region in the event of a kinetic strike against Iran's nuclear infrastructure, but on the other hand, also a very potent soft power campaign within various circles in the United States that have quite the influence in the current administration. Nonetheless, there are still certain actors surrounding Trump who are very clear-eyed with regard to the threat of a nuclear weapon, something that President Trump has stated, the dismantlement, so to speak, of an Iranian nuclear program, which is something that the Iranians would never expect.
Yeah, the thing that has me concerned, Jonathan, is too much of this is being played out in public. And every time I've seen negotiations where they're not done privately behind closed doors with people keeping their mouths shut, they usually don't end up the way anybody wants them to end up. Um, Look, if in fact the United States position right now is for the full disablement and disassembly of the Iranian nuclear program, that sounds very, very good in public, but I think all of us recognize that's not how it's going to turn out at the end of the negotiations. It may end up that way at the end of a military strike, but certainly not at the end of negotiations. Plus, there is this internal contradiction that President Trump continues to say, I'm the president that stops wars, not starts wars. So we haven't even talked about this issue of his reluctance to use the military option and this notion of if negotiations fail, that there would be a long increase on economic sanctions, such as embargoing Iranian oil shipments. So at this point, too much in the news, too much being stated as immovable objects and intractable points that I just don't think we're really at a serious point yet in the negotiations.
He does keep saying that. He comes to end wars and not start them. Nevertheless, with hundreds of attacks against U.S. interests and personnel and installations over the course of the last 2-3 years alone, I would define it as some type of low-intensity war against the United States, which the Iranians have been waging since 1979. So it is already a question of how do you package that, and that is something that President Trump's team needs to provide him options to deal with that. But nonetheless, we don't have very much time left. General Sofrin, your take on that from an Israeli perspective. Israel cannot accept, irrespective of the close relations with the Trump administration, a bad deal.
Jonathan, there's no good deal on this position because the Iranians won't give up. They signed, they're part of what we call the NPT, and therefore they're entitled to have a civilian or nuclear program for civilian use. But we know that the Iranians are concealing beyond that what we call the military plan, and therefore the fact that the American administration is willing to allow the Iranians to have such a program that will be only for civilian use is an option for developing what we call nuclear capabilities for the coming years. And they have a lot of patience. They don't rush anywhere. And they're willing to give up. They did it on 2005. They did it on 2015. And they will do it at 2025 as well. And wait, they have the patience. They have the time. They don't rush anywhere. In the end, they will have their capabilities, or they'll be at least a threshold country, just like they are now. and if they won't give out their capabilities, then no one will dismantle them totally, including the ballistic missiles.
I do want to point out that, yes, they are a signatory of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, namely the NPT, but nonetheless, in accordance with the latest reports, and this has been already consistent in the reporting of the International Atomic Energy Agency over the course of the last couple of years now, Iran has, or the agency has identified and retrieved nuclear particles from locations that the Iranians have not declared to the agency in contravention of the NPT, and therefore they're in breach of the NPT. And the agency has time and again requested answers to the 4 separate probes. It received consecutive answers that, according to Director General Grossi, are not consistent with technical credibility, or are not, basically they're lying, and in diplomatic terms, and therefore it's always a question about, where are we heading from here? Are we just going to establish a political solution to put this under the rug and then deal with other things, or are we going to really deal with the issue at hand? I hope President Trump remains clear-eyed on this issue. But with that, this is all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank General Soflin, General Kimmett, and Mr. Olin for all of your insights. And I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition from here in Jerusalem. Shalom.
Shalom, I'm Danny Ayalon, former Israeli ambassador to the United States, former deputy foreign minister and member of Knesset. Today, I'm very privileged to be hosting TV7's Middle East Review and also being a panelist of the various shows of TV7, which I find the most enlightening, most educating if you really want to understand the world, the global scene as well as the regional scene of the Middle East. It is worthwhile to watch TV7.
For more of TV7 Israel's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at www.tv7israelnews.com.